The Haunting of Old Mill Road. It was Halloween night, the air thick with an uneasy silence. The only sounds were the occasional gusts of wind rustling the leaves on Old Mill Road. The locals in town knew better than to venture down that path after dark, especially on Halloween. The road was infamous for being cursed, haunted by a presence that only grew stronger each year. For as long as anyone could remember, the old mill at the end of the road had stood abandoned, its windows shattered, and its once proud structure crumbling under the weight of time. Generations of children had dared one another to sneak to the mill, but none ever made it past the iron gates that creak ominously in the breeze. Something was watching. But this year was different. Emily, Jake, and Sarah were tired of the old stories. They were skeptical teens, unfazed by ghost tales that had kept generations trembling in fear. So when a whispered dare at the school Halloween party challenged them to spend the night at the mill, they scoffed at the idea of danger. Emily, the bravest, grabbed a flashlight, and the three set off, determined to prove the legend wrong. As they walked down the desolate road, a full moon bathed the path in a cold silver light. The houses gradually thinned out, replaced by the looming silhouettes of trees, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. They laughed and joked to shake off the unease. But as the mill came into view, their laughter faded. The mill stood there, more menacing than they had imagined. Its rotting wood and jagged, broken windows looked like the face of something that had witnessed horrors beyond comprehension. A dense fog began to swirl around their feet as they approached the gate. Jake pushed the rusty gate open, and it groaned in protest. The sound seemed to echo in the stillness, and suddenly everything felt wrong. "Let's just go inside, take a few pictures, and leave. We'll be back in no time," Sarah whispered, trying to mask the growing fear in her voice. They entered the courtyard, their flashlights flickering sporadically, as if the batteries were already dying. The air grew colder, their breath visible in the moonlight, despite it being a relatively warm evening. The silence weighed heavily on them as they moved closer to the mill's entrance. Suddenly, the door swung open on its own, a sharp creak piercing the air. Jake laughed nervously. "Must be the wind," he said, though no breeze stirred around them. Inside, the mill was a labyrinth of shadows. Dust hung thick in the air, and the walls were lined with old, decayed machinery. The beams overhead creaked, and every sound seemed amplified in the eerie silence. The three ventured deeper into the mill, their footsteps echoing unnaturally in the hollow space. Then came the whispers. At first they thought it was the wind seeping through the cracks in the wood, but the whispers grew louder, distinct voices. Emily's flashlight swept across the walls, revealing faded markings, old symbols that neither of them recognized. They were drawn, etched deeply into the wood, in what looked like dried blood. "Let's get out of here," Jake muttered, his bravado gone. But as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Panic set in. They rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. As they pounded on the wood, the whispers grew into guttural growls, filling the room with a sinister presence. A cold, malevolent energy closed in around them. Suddenly, Sarah screamed. Emily and Jake turned to see her standing rigid, her eyes wide with terror. "Do you see that?" she gasped. Pointing into the darkness, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Its skin was pale and stretched tight across its bones, its face twisted into a grotesque grin. It moved toward them, not walking, but gliding as if it were part of the very air itself. Frozen in place, they watched as the figure stretched out a hand toward them. Its fingers were unnaturally long, bony, and tipped with sharp, claw-like nails. As it reached Sarah, she let out a blood-curdling scream. The creature's hand passed right through her, and she collapsed to the ground unconscious. "We need to go now," Emily shouted, pulling Jake toward the back of the mill. They found a small, shattered window and scrambled through it, cutting their arms on the jagged glass. Behind them, the whispers turned to screams of agony, of souls lost to the darkness as they ran down Old Mill Road. The fog thickened, wrapping around them like a suffocating blanket. Emily glanced back and saw the figure standing at the edge of the mill, watching them, its glowing eyes locked onto hers. It didn't chase them. It didn't need to. The curse had been awakened. By the time they reached the town, Jake and Emily were gasping for breath, their faces pale with terror. They told everyone what had happened, but no one believed them except for one old man sitting at the bar. "The mill's been feeding for years," he said in a raspy voice. "Once you've seen it, you don't forget. It follows you. And it always comes back to finish what it started." As Emily and Jake walked home at night, the sound of distant whispers followed them. They could feel eyes watching from the darkness, waiting. The mill had marked them, and the mill was patient. No one ever saw Sarah again.